I start? Sure. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 17th annual seminar hosted by People with Disabilities Foundation, PWDF. I am Naveen Makhtoom, Program Manager for Public Awareness and Education at PWDF. PWDF was founded 18 years ago with a mission of total integration of people with mental and/or developmental impairments into the whole of society. Today's seminar is Employment Support Frameworks for people with psychiatric, intellectual, and/or developmental disabilities, with an emphasis on transitional age youth. This will be a 3-hour seminar with 3 parts. In the part 1, we address accommodating employees and job applicants with psychiatric disabilities, employee and employer rights and obligations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We will start by showing our 26-minute training video on this topic. This will be followed by Q&A with Patricia Finnegan, who is a former EEOC senior investigator since 1992. Theresa, San Francisco District Administrator, California Department of Rehabilitation. Dr. Cohen, who is a psychiatrist, and Stephen Bruce, PWDF's legal director. Part 2 of the seminar will address transitional age youth programs, age 15 to 24, for attaining vocational goals to maximize independent living. Speakers for this part include Dr. Cohen, Aiko Matsumura, LMFT Community Services Supervisor at Starlight Community Services, Michael Shockett, Director, Caminar Jobs Plus Program, and 2 consumer speakers. In part 3, Stephen Bruce will address Social Security Disability Work Incentive Rules for SSI. We have more complete bios of speakers as handouts on the tables. We encourage audience participation throughout the seminar, but please wait for the microphone. If you are watching via live stream, please feel free to submit questions through the comments function in YouTube. When you touch it, it goes up. If you are watching via live stream, please feel free to submit questions through the comment function in YouTube. If you are attending for continuing education credits, please sign in at the registration desk and turn in your evaluations before you leave. Please also take a moment to sign up to receive our e-newsletter. For those online, or if we run out of handouts, the handouts from this seminar will be available on our website at www.pwdf.org. Our moderator today is Stephen Bruce, founder and legal director of People with Disabilities Foundation. A few last reminders. Food and beverages are not allowed in the auditorium. Emergency exits are clearly marked, and please make sure that your cell phone ringers are off. Thank you.
For informational purposes and should not be relied on as being applicable to you. People with Disabilities Foundation, PWDF, does not intend to replace consultation with qualified professionals. Accordingly, the information in this video is provided with the understanding that PWDF and/or the medical and legal professionals are not engaged in rendering legal, medical, or other professional advice.
As we make our way through our busy workdays, we may not realize how many of the people we encounter have psychiatric disabilities. According to a Cornell University study published in 2007, 28.8% of working-age individuals have a mental impairment. Many people who struggle with psychiatric disorders significantly contribute to the workforce, with coworkers and employers never knowing about their situation. Conditions such as schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and bipolar disorder can often be controlled with appropriate medication and/or the support of therapists. These can be described as invisible disabilities. But many people with mental impairments are unemployed, despite a high percentage of this population wanting to work and being able to work with vocational or mental health support. The loss of productivity and human potential is costly for all of us. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, people with disabilities are not required to disclose their condition except when requesting an accommodation, and employers may not ask an applicant or employee if they have a disability. However, the ADA also requires that employers be ready to respond to a request for a reasonable accommodation. In this complex environment, many human resources managers worry about how to abide by the letter and spirit of the law, while best meeting the needs of their organization. In this video, experts in medical and regulatory issues will guide us through 4 scenarios that profile people with different diagnoses. We'll see people with different skill levels functioning effectively in their workplaces. We'll learn some strategies that can increase productivity, and we'll gain a better understanding of the rights and obligations of employees, job applicants, and employers. Let's start by looking at the case of Scott, an actual office supplies sales associate with Staples. Scott has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Staples knew that Scott had a disability from the beginning, but not the diagnosis, and agreed to allow a job coach, a counselor employed by a social service agency, to meet with Scott on site to help him improve his performance at work.
Scott's job is number 1 priority is customer service. That's what the Staples is all about, is customer service. So his job is to make sure that every single customer that walks in a store is being helped.
I'm looking for a pen like this.
Yes, those are on aisle 1. Let me show you.
Okay, thanks.
I've been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Here you go.
Okay, thanks.
I see a therapist once a week, and I see a psychiatrist maybe once every month or 2. It doesn't stop me from being able to work here. As a matter of fact, I enjoy working here.
Schizophrenia is one of the psychotic disorders, and the prominent features in schizophrenia, especially paranoid schizophrenia, is the presence of hallucinations.
So, for example, a person may perceive auditory hallucinations. They may hear voices or other sounds. They're often voices, but not always.
Another prominent symptom of schizophrenia are delusions, which are false beliefs, and these can be either persecutory, meaning that I believe that my boss is out to get me or my coworkers are out to get me, even though that is clearly not the case, or what they call referential, which means that I can believe that the television's talking specifically to me. It's sending me a signal.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question about a computer.
Yes, that's not really my department, but I can take you to someone who can answer any of your questions.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things employers really need to understand is that psychological disabilities, psychiatric disabilities are considered the non-visible, non-apparent disabilities. You can be in a workplace, and unless someone identifies their symptoms to you or is actively having significant symptoms, you wouldn't know that they have paranoid schizophrenia or depression or OCD.
Oh, hey.
Hey, Charlotte, how are you?
Sarkis.
Scott's job coach, Charlotte, meets with his supervisor.
So how's Scott doing?
Actually, things are going very, very well. He just last month got our Associate of the Month.
Great. That's so good to hear. Any problems? Anything to work on?
Yeah. One thing I really like to have him work on, if it's possible, I really like to have him open up a little bit and communicate with others. And since we are a team here, it will help him a great deal, of course. There's,
Okay.
She coaches me. She encourages me and motivates me to do better on the job. And if there's some kind of problem I have at work, she'll let me know and tells me what I can work on to make things better at work.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, Charlotte.
How's it going?
Not too good.
Oh, really?
I'm a little nervous. I think I might get fired.
Just anxiety?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Actually, I just talked to your supervisor, and he reported that you're doing a stellar job. Customer service has been great.
All right.
So there's
Nothing to worry about?
No.
Okay.
He said you've just been super.
Oh, well, thank you.
So the one thing that Sarkis did mention that he thought could use improvement was maybe in terms of getting along with your coworkers or a sense of teamwork and rapport.
Okay.
I said something you feel?
Yeah, I'm a little
Maybe.
shy with the other workers, I think.
Oh, okay. So one strategy that's pretty simple would be to use your coworkers' names when you come to work in the morning. Just address them by name and how are you doing,
Okay.
Maria, or
All right.
just to build that sense of teamwork a little bit.
Initially, when he sat down with the coach, his anticipation was that there was something very negative that had been said about him and that he was on the verge of losing his job, which was in direct contrast with the glowing evaluation he had received from his employer. So his ability to use the job coach as a reality testing kind of individual, that's another skill that will come in very handy to him when paranoid kinds of thoughts creep into his thinking in other settings.
I think that Scott is a great example of when there is a really strong base of support, how wonderful that can be to have a job coach, a therapist, and a psychiatrist. So someone who's managing your medication, someone who's talking to you about your interactions, and doing some therapeutic work, and then someone on the job site who can really help coach you along through some of the difficult times. I wish everyone would have that opportunity.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Scott.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
If the person is a qualified individual with a disability who can do the essential functions of the job and they need a job coach to help them, I would say yes, an employer is obligated to make that accommodation unless they can come up with something else that would be just as good. Maybe they're willing to assign, maybe they don't want somebody else coming in from the outside. If they're willing to assign a colleague to work with that person to help them get up to speed, I think that would be acceptable. It doesn't have to be the identical request of the disabled party, but it does have to be something that will help them get on equal footing.
In our first scenario, we saw how the simple accommodation of allowing a job coach to meet with an employee at work facilitated communication and helped the employee improve his performance. In addition to the counseling of a job coach, therapist, or psychiatrist, medications can play an important role in helping a person with a psychiatric disability function well in the workplace. But medications can also have side effects that may impair an employee's ability to do a particular job. In our next scenario, we'll meet a registered nurse with a master's degree in hospital administration who's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. We won't use his real name because his situation is not completely resolved. In this scenario, we'll call him Douglas.
Her injuries are healing quite well.
Yes, doctor, but she still seems to be in a lot of pain.
As a registered nurse, Douglas worked for years in the ward of a large medical center.
Okay, I will write an order for a morphine drip.
I'm diagnosed with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the underlying diagnoses include depression, anxiety, panic attack, hyperstartle response, nightmares.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder that would be under the category of an anxiety disorder. And typically, the person who has post-traumatic stress disorder has had an experience that is severely shocking, where they felt their life was threatened, or the life of somebody that they care about was threatened, or they witnessed somebody else's life be threatened. Probably the classic example is the war veteran who may have witnessed bombings and dismembered bodies or things like that, that then stay in their mind as images that come back unbidden.
After the event, there tends to be a cluster of symptoms. The individual will re-experience the event such that they will have dreams, nightmares about the event. They'll constantly think about the event. The event will just suddenly appear in their mind. The individual can also experience symptoms of almost kind of a numbing, a depersonalization, where they don't feel anything, as a way to protect themselves from the thought of the event.
For me, symptoms go back to 1978 when I was in the military. Things always seem to be under control until something stressful starts happening in life or at work. When I get to the point where I start feeling panicky or the anxiety is high and I start having chest pain or I feel like the world's going to come to an end or I feel like something bad is getting ready to happen, I can decompensate in a matter of minutes and fall apart literally right in front of your eyes. May I have your medical record number, please?
After taking time away from work to get his PTSD stabilized by medication and psychotherapy, Douglas returned to work as a telephone advice nurse. The position was less stressful, but new issues arose.
I take a lot of medication. There are side effects with most of the medications that causes problems in the workplace. Thank you very much for calling and have a good evening.
Douglas,
Yes.
I need to talk to you about how much time you're taking with each one of these calls.
Is there a problem?
Yeah. Well, we like our advice nurses to spend about 2, maybe 2.5 minutes per call.
Okay.
Yeah, and we track our calls. Now, some calls might be a little bit longer, but you're spending 4 minutes per call. Douglas, we've talked about the fact that you're taking too much time with these calls.
I know, and there's something I should probably tell you. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, and the medication I take for anxiety and depression seems to be slowing down my thought processes.
Thank you for telling me that. I don't know what our legal obligation is or how we can accommodate you, but I think I better talk to our HR people about this.
Thank you. I like to stay in a call center, and I'm flexible.
What we really need to do is find out what the medical condition is. Would you mind talking to one of our staff psychologists?
No problem.
Once somebody discloses a disability and requests an accommodation, then the employer has a commitment to engage in an interactive process and figure out what accommodation is appropriate.
Dr. Jones, I understand you've evaluated Douglas and his cognitive abilities.
Yes, that's right. Douglas and I had an extensive interview, and I administered a battery of tests to determine how he processes information and how long it takes him. I found that Douglas can understand written and orally transmitted information as well as or better than average. However, it is clear that it does take him longer.
Can you quantify how much longer it would take him?
Based on the psychometric testing, it takes Douglas 50% more time to process information.
I think that's why it takes me longer on advice calls. I need to make sure I understand the patient's problem completely before I give out any advice.
That's really good that you give out complete information, but it's just too long. I mean, we might have someone waiting at the other end that needs immediate response, and we can't have that.
I can go back and work on the ward.
I'm afraid that might be even more of a problem. There's really a safety issue here.
Okay, I'm qualified to do administrative work because of my master's degree in nursing.
Okay, I don't know what positions might be available, but let me look into that for you.
Employers don't need to create a brand new job for someone. But if there is another job that the person can do, that they're qualified to do, that they can perform the essential functions of that job, then yes, I would say that the employer should make every effort to put them into that.
Unfortunately, in Douglas's case, the employer failed to provide an alternative position. Not all employers agree to accommodations requested by their employees, nor are they required to do so. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires a good faith interactive process between the employer and employee. If this does not resolve a dispute, an employee has the option of filing a complaint with a state employment agency or the EEOC, the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But even if a complaint is filed, sometimes a mediator from the EEOC can help conflicting parties arrive at a resolution.
The first thing an employee needs to do is talk to their human resources department if they're having a problem at work and see whether or not it can be dealt with in-house. If they decide to come to the EEOC and file a complaint, they're given the option immediately on whether they want to go to mediation.
In our next scenario, we'll see a simulated mediation created by the EEOC that illustrates how mediation can work. This simulated case involves Anne, an analyst at an investment bank who's been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. Her employer believes that even though Anne has been very productive at the bank, her request for an accommodation is unreasonable, and thus she finds herself in mediation. The mediator begins by reviewing the ground rules before asking each party to state their case.
It's important to remember, first of all, that it is a confidential process. And throughout the mediation, it's important to listen to each other, to try to keep an open mind, and to be open to compromise. So Anne, why don't you go ahead and get started?
I am a MBA. I hold Master's in Statistics, and the crux of my position at the bank is for research in acquisitions and possible mergers. And I've been a successful employee with outstanding evaluations during the course of my 12 years. However, as of recent, I've been diagnosed with OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. With this disease, sometimes I become a little unfocused, and I tend to have the desire to keep things neat, spend too much time on things because I've lost focus. So I've asked the employer to provide me with an accommodation. They have 12 administrative assistants, and I've simply asked them for the assistance of one of the administrative assistants. And if they provided that accommodation, I would be able to successfully complete my tasks. And they just won't do it. So that is why we're here today.
Obsessive compulsive disorder has two components. It has the obsessions, which are repetitive, unbidden thoughts about different things. So it kind of depends what the thoughts are about. Often they're about neatness and symmetry and things like that. And the compulsion to do certain things. This can manifest itself by a person having a lot of difficulty sorting out what's essential versus what's non-essential in a particular task.
We've all had the experience of leaving our house, walking half a block, and wondering whether we locked our door. You know, that thought comes into our mind. So we go back and we check our door and we move on. For someone with an obsessive-compulsive disorder, these obsessions are so persistent, usually taking over an hour a day, that they become paralyzing at some level.
In this case, the employer is willing to make an accommodation, but has not agreed to the specific accommodation that Anne has requested.
I am aware of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the employer's obligation to accommodate an employee. The request that you've made for the admin assistant to help you all day is really something that's not going to work. We have 12 administrative assistants, but they are all busy. So we've come up with an accommodation we feel would be effective, and that is the timer. And we know that under the ADA, we don't have to give the employee an accommodation that she requested, just an accommodation that would help her to effectively perform the essential functions of her job. We feel the timer is appropriate and effective.
The mediation process includes private discussions between the mediator and each of the disputing parties. Here, the mediator talks with Anne to clarify what she will be willing to accept as an accommodation.
During the opening, I asked for 8 hours, but really, I could use the assistance of the administrative assistant for 4 hours, and that would be an effective accommodation for me.
After caucusing with the employee, the mediator meets individually with the employer and brokers an agreement that she can accept.
If you're willing to entertain the notion of having some of an administrative assistant's time for her, then what can you live with?
Well, I possibly can afford to have someone help her for 2 hours. So, but I'm willing to give it a try on perhaps a trial basis.
You take all these thousands of cases, you put them before a mediator, and if you've got a good mediator, they work them out and they settle. It's just a wonderful new opportunity.
Mediation can be a real help to employees and employers who find themselves in a dispute. But employers accommodate the needs of most employees with mental disabilities in much the same way they respond to the needs of any other employee, just by being flexible. Let's look at the case of Ellen, who works in the library of the California Institute of Integral Studies. Ellen is an actual employee of CIIS who's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Hi. Hi, my name's Ellen. I'm the librarian here.
Hi, I'm Lisa.
I'm a reference librarian. I have a master's in library science. There's certain hours out of each day where I sit at the reference desk.
Well, I just started school here last semester, and I'm going to be writing a paper, doing research for a paper.
Students will come up either for a general intro to the library or for a specific question, in which case I'll guide them through certain software and to get articles on their specific questions. And basically we're going to start under the word research, and we're going to go to the library catalog first. The library I also maintain the website here at the library. And I also am general support for people working on computers in the library.
What do you think? Where should we put it?
I have bipolar II disorder. This has only been in the last 6 or 7 years. And that's why I stopped being a computer programmer and found this job instead.
Bipolar disorder is a mood disorder that's characterized by alternation between depression and mania. Mania is most often kind of an excitability or agitation. Oftentimes patients feel very irritable. Things just annoy them, and they might act in a kind of explosive way with their families or with their loved ones, or in the workplace.
There are two types of bipolar disorder in general, bipolar I disorder and bipolar II disorder. Bipolar I disorder, the symptoms last at least 1 week or any time if there's hospitalization, and there usually are more symptoms involved than in bipolar II disorder, which usually lasts less than 4 days, up to 4 days, and the number of symptoms associated are less.
I was on disability for several years before I ended up getting my meds adjusted enough to look for work. I did have this degree, this master's in library science, so I looked for a position that combined both computers and library science. I knew I couldn't go on and be a computer programmer in the biotech industry.
I thought her approach was quite brilliant. She assessed what her skill sets were, which was computers and her degree that she had in library science. She also had the insight to know that the work environment that she was in, with all the deadlines in the biotech industry and all the pressure, was something that she really didn't find helpful.
We got Ellen in actually a rather unusual way. She approached us saying, I'd like to do an internship with you. It's been a while since I've worked in a library. I have a library degree, but I went right off to work in the .com industry during that boom. And now I'm thinking I might want to get back into libraries. I'd like to see what it's like.
Because she developed a good relationship with her supervisor while working as an intern, Ellen felt comfortable enough to voluntarily disclose her disability when she was offered full-time employment. It's important to remember that the only time individuals with disabilities are required to disclose their condition is when requesting an accommodation.
So Ellen, we're delighted that you'll be able to be with us full-time. We're really glad that we can move you over from being an intern to actually a full-time real employee.
Thank you.
So we're glad to have you.
You may have noticed that I tend to work later in the day than early.
I kind of got that sense, yeah. But we could probably work it out so that you had an 8-hour day, but that started later, like a 10 to 6 or 11 to 7. Would those work for you?
11 to 7 would be great. I mean, I'd really appreciate it. There's something else I'd like to talk to you about as long as I'm talking, and that's that I have bipolar disorder. And right now my meds are really well adjusted, so I don't see an issue with that. But I thought I should tell you, to be completely honest.
Thank you. I appreciate your daring to tell me. I know it's not easy to say. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate the confidence.
Yeah, it feels good to be open about it, so thank you for that.
Great.
Okay.
Good. Thanks.
I think it's a good thing in society if we can all learn to be as inclusive as we possibly can be.
The kinds of accommodations that an individual with a psychological psychiatric disability will need are not all that complex. And they're things that, if there's a good relationship between employer and employee, can be created with minimal complications.
People need to talk to each other and let each other know what their needs are and whether they can be met, and if not, why they can't be met. And I think people can come to some agreement if they're really entering into those discussions with good faith. and they really want to resolve it in a positive way.
Our clients tend to take work very seriously, stay on the job sometimes longer than your average turnover rate, because they just really value that consistent showing up and being of service.
I think absenteeism and psychiatric disabilities is a complex issue. It's complex for the individual who wants to get to work and be a participant in their job. It's complex for the employer who has basic job requirements that they need. And I think that's where it goes down to, is that there are basic job requirements. But there are ways to kind of think outside the box, so to speak. It may be that one way to reduce absenteeism is with flexible scheduling.
I just wish people would focus on the abilities that people have rather than on the disabilities that people have, because there's so many people who would fit under the Americans with Disability Act that have fantastic abilities. And I'd also like to remind people that any one of us can become disabled at any time. And we really need to be a lot more sensitive to that issue and make sure that we're extending every opportunity to people to create a level playing field so that they can get into the workforce, so they can contribute, and they can really make a difference.
When both employers and employees are flexible, ready to communicate clearly, and willing to work together, most problems can be resolved. By being reasonable and open, employers can help make their workplace more inclusive and compliant with the ADA. Thank you for joining us.
Just for the heck of it, 'cause I think there was a problem. Jack. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand so someone can come over with a cordless mic, as this is being live streamed at the same time. Although this film was made a couple of years ago, it is, from a legal point of view, up to date. There's nothing in it that has changed, even pursuant to the 2008 ADA Amendments Act. I don't know if the two women on my right had comments about the video or things to add.
Sure. I would like to talk first a little bit more about job coaching. The example we saw, the job coach actually went to the work site to visit with the individual. What we also do is off-site job coaching for a couple of different reasons. Number one, the person might feel stigmatized having somebody come in and meet with them one-on-one, and they want that private time to talk to their job coach. So, being able to call on a break or meet after work or during lunch off-site can be helpful to the individual. Sometimes it's because of space. For instance, maybe they're working in a food setting in a very tight kitchen quarters where it might be really hard to have a job coach on site with them. So maybe doing some work with the job coach before or after work to learn a job skill, using a piece of machinery to do their work. That would be an example of another type of not having the job coach at the time. And then lastly, in professional settings, sometimes people do not want to have a job coach there because they're working maybe in a team environment, they're in an office setting, it may feel uncomfortable. So again, that's another request. And then I also wanted to highlight the use of what we call natural supports, and it was briefly mentioned in the video, but it's also very effective. So that's having someone within the work site a colleague, another manager who could be a mentor for that individual and help them to really learn their job tasks also. And a job coach can help facilitate that, looking for that friendly face, someone who seems like they'd be really open to helping that individual out. I think we all know about it in our own work lives of finding that person that could be of assistance. So those are a few highlights I'd like to bring up from the video.
I would also like to mention in the video, or to clarify, I was the mediator. I was a real mediator at one time. At EEOC, the mediation process is the first thing that is offered, and it's voluntary. So if either the employer or the individual who has a complaint doesn't want to do it, they don't have to do it. So it's a voluntary process, and it also leads to compromise solutions sometimes. So for example, in the reasonable accommodation situation, it's pretty rare in a mediation for somebody to agree to something on a trial basis. Usually you settle it or you don't, you come up with a solution or you don't. And the person with the complaint is very welcome, if they're not satisfied with whatever is being offered, to stop mediation and continue with the process. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Patty, how long does this process take on average? Let's say the person is not satisfied or doesn't get an offer more than a timer in this situation. Can you estimate an average length of time towards disposition before going to court?
You're talking about the charge process, not the mediation process.
Correct.
It can take years. It varies quite a bit, but it can take 6 months to 2 years before the person might either be issued a notice of right to sue or discrimination is found. In which, if discrimination is found, then EEOC. If they don't get a remedy, then the person will receive a right to sue, or EEOC may even go to court in rare cases on the person's behalf. But they have a big backlog. So what takes so long is for the case to be assigned to an investigator once, let's say, mediation fails or the case doesn't go to mediation. It takes quite a while to get to an investigator simply because they have a small staff and a very large backlog.
There are questions there if someone has the microphone. Thank you.
I was noticing in the video, it came up on I believe in the beginning when they were talking about the PTSD. And my question had to do with the woman already had a qualified diagnosis, more than likely from a psychiatrist and a person who's experienced in that area, but then they said she had to be re-examined to see if she qualified. And that's the same argument they do with unemployment disability. They seem to go back and forth. And my issue is, if you've already got a qualified psychiatrist and you're taking medication, then that should be sufficient with PTSD. And I know a lot about PTSD being a veteran, so there's two different kinds. But if that was me, I would have said, no, I've already got my diagnosis, talked to my psychiatrist, and that's where I would have taken it.
Yeah, sometimes that might happen when the person doesn't know what their accommodation should be. So, and it was the gentleman, and in his example, he had been doing a job for a long time, and this call center job was new to him, and he just knew it was taking him longer, and his employer knew it was taking him longer, but he wasn't sure how to accommodate it. So a way to get around that would be, let me talk to my mental health professionals and get back to you, so he wouldn't have had to go through that evaluation, and then brainstorm it with his psychiatrist or his therapist of how it could be accommodated. If they really felt still they needed some sort of evaluation, they could go ahead and do that. But yeah, I thought that was rather a unique situation. I don't usually see it done by the employer.
So it was based more on the function to get to the executive functioning skill to see if he qualified for the reasonable
I
accommodation.
think they were trying to see how he should be accommodated.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
They were actually trying to evaluate the essential functions of the job and see if they could accommodate him because they had a particular speed and productivity requirement. So I don't know if his Teresa's right. He could have gone to the individual therapist, his own therapist, who may or may not have had ideas about how that would work because that person wouldn't necessarily be familiar with his job.
And let's not lose sight of the definition of disability, and to be protected under the ADA, you must be able to do the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. And apparently an essential function of the telephone advice nurse at Kaiser Hospital was to be able to do it in an average of 2 minutes, not twice as long or 4 minutes. So if he was not able to do it in 2 minutes, then they, instead of terminating him, had to consider a reasonable accommodation, which in this case involved finding him another position within the system, not create a new one. And in this situation, they said it was unresolved. He was actually my client who concurrently had a Social Security and ADA case, and they refused to give him a position in Southern California where his family was, his ex-wife and kids, and only in Northern California. And so there were some other issues that went a little beyond the scope of this video. As there are in most cases, it's hard in under 30 minutes to go over all the ins and outs of the ADA and the accommodation process. In the end, at least for the time being, he did qualify for Social Security disability because he met the minimum 12-month duration requirement, and did not get offered and decided not to push getting another job in the region that he wanted to. And that's another issue. Do they have to offer you an existing job, like an administrative job, in the geographical area? And the case law is no, they don't. So that was a big issue in this case. He wanted to be placed in San Diego as opposed to Oakland or San Francisco. So when you get deeper and deeper into who wants what and their functional limitations and their ability to do the essential job functions, in real life, it's often a little more complicated than on first sight. There's a question from the young lady in front.
Hi, I have two questions. The first question is regarding the job coaching. I'm just wondering how people get connected to job coaching. My second question is with regard to how we should determine what complaints should go to California Department of Fair Employment and Housing versus what complaints to file with EEOC.
So I'll take the first question. At the Department of Rehabilitation, all of our eligible individuals we serve can be eligible for job coaching. And so when we do vocational planning with them and seeing what their needs are, we identify a job coach. We have partner with a lot of community partners in the community. A little later, you're going to hear from one of them, Kaminar. And they'll be talking more about their program, but they have job coaches available. There are several other community agencies in all the different cities that provide this service. And we also have individual service providers that we have on call on our staff that we can provide job coaching.
And regarding the second question, part of the answer is about coverage.
Department of Fair Employment and Housing covers the state of California's law prohibiting disability discrimination. It covers employees who have 5 or more, employers who have 5 or more employees. Generally, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is enforced by the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to be covered, the employer has to employ at least 15 employees. So if it's a very small business, you're going to go to the state. In a lot of cases, the employee simply has a choice. They can go to whichever one they want. In fact, EEOC and DFEH have a partnership so that if somebody goes to EEOC and files a charge, they ask the employee if they want it to be dual filed with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. If they do, in most cases they do, then it is dual filed and is covered at the point where a lawsuit may come up. It could be covered at both the state and the federal levels. Because DFEH has a lot, many cases, they often transfer, even if somebody goes to them, they often transfer the case to EEOC anyway for investigation.
Please wait for the mic. There's a question.
Yes, I got here a little late, so forgive me if you already addressed this, but what types of training do your job coaches get specific to disabilities? I guess I'm especially interested in autism and the kinds of training that the job coaches get.
So we look, first of all, on what the disability is. Certain community agencies, some specialize in certain disabilities. So you were mentioning autism. There are agencies that's their focus, and they will provide job coaching in that area. There are other agencies that specialize in mental health, so they will have a job coach that focuses on that. And then we have some agencies that work with a variety of disabilities. Most of the people, it's not required to have a bachelor's degree, but a lot of folks do have bachelor's degrees. A lot of them have degrees in psychology, social services, community services. We also, in the mental health arena, have what we call consumer providers, so people with lived experience in mental health who have themselves received job coaching or different services and are now gone back to school, and now they're working in the field. So it's really a variety of backgrounds.
And are there any agencies that address dual diagnosis like autism and OCD or whatever, dual diagnosis?
They pretty much either specialize in mental health, and in a lot of the agencies that work with individuals with intellectual disabilities also is a dual diagnosis a lot with mental health. So we do, in that arena, you definitely see dual diagnosis.
All right, there was an online question for Patty Finnegan, it looks like. It says, please go into more detail about how to go about asking the employer for a job coach. Well, a job coach is a reasonable accommodation, and if the job coach is going to be on the premises, of course you would need to request an accommodation, and in doing so you would need to disclose why you need a job coach. If it's off-site, I don't see any reason, except if you need to take work time to do it, that you would even have to discuss it with the employer. So it's like with any other accommodation that's reasonable. They don't have to give you the exact accommodation you've requested, but if it's some kind of job coach, those are the primary factors. Disclosing, remember, as it said in the video, you don't ever have to disclose your disability unless you're asking for an accommodation. Patty, did you have anything to?
So what I would say, first of all, is that a lot of employers don't even know what a job coach is. So when in situations that I have dealt with, And remember that I mostly dealt with them in connection of when a discrimination charge has already been filed. It's typically, in my experience, been the employee's request or someone's request on behalf of the employee, perhaps a Department of Rehabilitation counselor or some other kind of agency official, or sometimes depending on what kind of disability the person has. Sometimes it might even be like a parent or a guardian or somebody like that. So I actually think that, Theresa, you probably have more experience in that sort of thing happening.
Yeah, a lot of times our folks, either they find their own job and they may discuss it, or we have a business specialist or a job developer who helps them find the job. And we actually sell job coaching as an incentive to employers to say, hey, we know you're super busy, and this person will help the individual learn the job tasks when you're not available. And employers like that because, hey, we all know it. We have a lot of different tasks to do on a job. So that is definitely a selling point. I also wanted to add that a lot of times we read duty statements. The individual, they read the duty statement and they go, I can do this job. I don't need a job coach. But maybe the duty statement didn't list those other duties as assigned. And it's like, oh, that's where I really need some help. Or perhaps 6 months or a year down the road, they get a promotion, or their job changes, or they get a supervisor that maybe explains things a little bit differently, that at that point they can ask for a job coach. So I always make sure folks know that it's through the life of that whole job, not just when they start the job, that a job coach is available.
I just wanted to add that one of the things that's important in terms of clients who have autism is social skills training. And that's often the area where people need the most support and assistance. And there are many different approaches to doing social skills training, but that's one of the services that's not a formal mental health service per se, but is something that should be integrated into those kinds of programs for people who are seeking employment.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that's another service that we can provide where we're just working on those social skills with the individual, and we come up with an agreement on what we need to work on, whether it's how we communicate with others or making eye contact. So we do work on that also.
And a lot of times there's no need for an employer to have any clue that that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a question, the girl with a blue sweater.
Hi there. Thank you very much for being here. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of informational website with the EEOC to be able to read more up on other cases. It's just very interesting to me, and I'm wondering if I can expand my knowledge.
www.eeoc.gov, as in government.
And then there's there specific instruction to find those that, a menu?
Yeah, there's a lot of help on the website itself directing you to the kinds of information that you're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question back there.
There's a question.
I thought the woman.
Can you repeat the website, please?
Yes, it's eeoc.gov.
Okay, at this point, we're going to move on to part 2 and start off with our 2 consumers, Alex and Edward. If they would please come up here. Well, it's all right. Hi, Alex and Edward. Please take a seat. Alex, starting with you, It's my understanding that you were misdiagnosed at a young age, and it really wasn't until more recently than you were correctly diagnosed as to have a primary diagnosis of autism. Could you explain what your first diagnosis was and how you felt about that first diagnosis, how it affected your life when you were a student in middle or high school, and how it
Good evening,
affected
thank you. First of all, long story short, it took me, 15 years to actually figure out exactly what happened with me. I was diagnosed with, it took me a while to get diagnosed with cerebral palsy, but before that, they gave me the MR diagnosis. And honestly, it took me a very long time to figure it out because, I'm gonna be honest, most of my friends when I was growing up, they were telling me, Alex, what were you diagnosed with? But for security reasons, I didn't want to explain that because I didn't want them to use the information against me. But once I fully understand the situation, I kind of came to terms with it. But the way the information was given to me, I wasn't very happy with it. But when I found out about it, it was like, oh, now I understand myself better because it made me a better person for who I am. And there was a struggle with me, I'm not gonna lie. It was a very, very difficult struggle for me to figure it out because I was afraid to tell my friends or my family or anybody I talked to unless they asked me to, but it was the most challenging part of my life.
Well, how was the diagnosis of, you said MR, meaning mental retardation, or these days it's hopefully called intellectual disability, but was it something that you felt, less than normal or made fun of? Or, I mean, how did you cope with that diagnosis? Or did you even feel necessary to cope with being a student, a young individual, when people asked you, you're about...
Honestly?
Yes.
Honestly, I didn't want to tell them because I wanted to protect myself. So I kind of kept it buried under the rug, so to speak. But eventually I had to come out and tell them. The only one who I told them exactly what was going on was my employer. And I honestly just kept it to myself. But honestly, when I first found out, when I looked at the paperwork, I was like, huh? And when I was diagnosed, I was honestly offensive. Excuse me. I found it offensive, and it made me very, very angry and upset that they would say this to me, but my parents told me, oh, we just needed to say that for the benefits. But you know what? That's not the way we do things these days, because people might misdiagnose you and they might take it the wrong way and they might say, oh, and believe me, I was made fun of in school with this information too. So that's why I buried it under the rug, so to speak. But after I found out about it, it took me like 5 years after the diagnosis to finally open up with my friends and my family more, and they now understand, but I keep certain pieces of information out for security reasons. So.
And when you say for benefits, you mean for disability or Social Security benefits? Is that what you mean when you say benefit?
Yes.
Okay. And now, I mean, since you have a new and different diagnosis of autism, are you on benefits, or are you working so that you're not qualified for benefits because you're working?
I am qualified with benefits to work, but I was never diagnosed with autism, just for the record. It was cerebral palsy.
Oh, so, cerebral palsy.
Yeah, a lot of people get that misinformed, but that's okay.
And cerebral palsy, how old were you when you had the diagnosis of?
I was actually, let's see, I was actually 15 or 16 years old when I found out about it. I'm 31 now, so it took me a while. I was like, yeah, it took me a long time to get the information out. But when I was on this journey, I wanted to fully, and when I talked to my parents about my journey, I wanted to say, I wanted to understand exactly what's going on, because I don't want to leave most of the information in the dark. I kind of want to come out into the light, but I kind of want to, when most people talk about their disability, they're uncomfortable. So sometimes, I don't know if anyone agrees, but some people sugarcoat the information, or they find another way of telling them without really telling them. But it took me a little while longer than everybody else to open up and express on my diagnosis.
How were you properly diagnosed finally?
Well, oh man, I don't even remember, but let me see if I can think. I actually went to the doctor, and they actually gave me the test results, and they said that I had CP, cerebral palsy. And I went to my last EEG scan when I was, I believe, 17 or 18 years old, junior in high school. Yeah, around 17 or 18 years of age, I went to my last EEG scan, and that's when they told me. But then when I looked at the paperwork from my employer and they said what I had, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't right, because they still have the word MR in the paperwork. I'm like, no. So I had to go back to my employer and tell him, hey, you got to remove that from the system because that's not right. So.
Okay. Edward, your situation is also sort of a common situation. You have, and please correct me if I'm not stating this correctly, you have a dual diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
You're diagnosed with substance addiction, but you also have a mood disorder, including depression and anxiety, and it's comorbid, meaning they're both sort of waxing and waning and there at the same time. Now, you have worked for a few years doing what I would describe as working with the general public under supervision, manual labor, unskilled, maybe to some semi-skilled, both in the restaurant and other industries. Could you describe what it's been like for you having this dual diagnosis, and if you view, and you're in rehab now, is that correct?
I just graduated the program about a week ago. So.
Okay.
Well, so your question is, how did my diagnosis affect my employment? Or?
How did your diagnosis affect your life, including employment? And now that you've just graduated, what are your vocational plans and goals?
Well, so my last job, I was working at Bolero as a porter, the bowling place. When I was working there, I was deep in my addiction. I was using a lot of heroin, a lot of Xanax, and because I was using both, the risk of overdosing is higher, and I actually overdosed my second time, and because of that overdose, I got cardiac arrest, kidney and liver failure, and I was put on dialysis at 19 years old, and I was found on my leg, on the floor on my leg, so all the blood circulation was lost, and that caused my leg to swell up, and it made me very so much in pain, and I needed physical therapy, but I already missed a month of work, and right after I got back to work, I told my boss, maybe I can't work, I need some time off, but he said, you already missed a month of work. I need you to at least try, and if you can't do it, you can work you can take as much breaks as you want. And after one day, I just couldn't do it, I was in too much pain. And I told my boss because of that, and he fired me because I missed too much work. And that was my last job.
Is that when you got into a rehab and recovery program?
No, I suffered for another 2 years of my addiction. I overdosed 4 more times after that, and I just wasn't learning my lesson until I got arrested 2 times in a matter of 30 days, and after that, being in jail for the first time, I just decided, maybe this is a sign, I need to stop. I've already almost lost my life. Either, in NA meetings, they say you're either gonna go to jails, institutions, or death, and I already touched all of them, and I decided that I needed to submit myself into residential treatment, and
So it wasn't court ordered or anything?
No.
It took a while, but you voluntarily made a decision that you needed to do this for yourself, to detox and then get into rehab. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And what, now that you said you graduated, what are your plans for working? You want to work?
Yes, I do. My vocational goal right now is to, sometime soon go to school, start working on my KDAC so I can help other addicts in their recovery. But as of right now, I'm waiting to start in a Caltrain. I actually started, I got that job offer from a friend I met in rehab, so yeah, pretty excited to start working.
When do you start?
I made the call yesterday, and he said he's going to tell his boss, and he said probably next week, probably in the next 7 days.
Sounds good. Okay, I want to thank you, Edward, and you, Alex, very much for sharing the stories with us. And hand over the microphone to Dr. Cohen, Iko, and Michael in part 2 of today's seminar.
I need to get my clicker.
The clicker.
Theresa, can you grab it out of my purse right there and bring, it should be on top, the clicker. Oh, no, it's one of the, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Clicker.
Peter Davis.
While we're looking, there is another online question. What are you doing at the school level to create awareness or training the kids to be ready to get a job?
Have the whole screen up.
Hopefully, elementary, middle, and senior high school is part of the program is always looking forwards to being a productive member of society with vocational goals. Now, awareness is a big debate in terms of public awareness in the classroom. for students with disabilities and having the non-disabled students become aware. There is disagreement. That was actually our first seminar in elementary and secondary education. There was a lot of disagreement on using that as meaning elementary school as a place, the first place for public awareness. It's our opinion at People with Disabilities Foundation that it is a good place to share that with other students in elementary school. Unfortunately, there are others who don't agree
Steve,
with it. With that
The Department of Rehabilitation is launching a brand new program, Student Services, where they're going to be doing outreach to schools, community colleges, charter schools, universities, and one of Theresa, if you want to talk more about that, but basically that's what it is. It's a lot of money is going into that program to talk about awareness and to get kids working and give them the tools that they need so they don't have to become clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. And Theresa and her student services team is here, and one of them is Christy Adams is here, who'll be launching that program in San Francisco.
Thank you. It does seem like there are a lot of kids who think their only realistic alternative is to get on benefits and spend their lives as a couch potato and collect a check. And unfortunately, that's just the status quo in too many places. And
can I say something?
That needs a change.
If I may?
Yes.
I do want to encourage people with disabilities that if you want to get a job in life, excuse me, if anyone wants to get a job in life, to set your own goals. You know, despite me being disabled, you know, I was able to have a job working 3 years for my employer, and for me, it was a very good start because I want people to understand that people with disabilities can have a job. That doesn't make them say, oh, I can't, you know, just because I'm disabled, I can't be employed. No, that's wrong. You have to set your goals in your mind by saying that you can do it, that you can get a job, and you can do, as other member of society, be part of society rather than being standing out in the crowd, so to speak. So we want to encourage those people who want to get a job to, if you know somebody, if you have a friend who works in certain industries, ask them to give you a hand and see if they can get you through an opportunity to get that foot in the door, because once you're in, you're already in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here. Today I'm going to talk about diagnoses, risk and protective factors, and evidence-based interventions for transitional age youth with psychiatric and behavioral disabilities. We often talk about nature versus nurture, and the fact is that mental illnesses are inherited, but they're also caused by environmental factors. This slide reflects multiple studies regarding the range of inheritance for various major psychiatric disorders. And as you can see, there's a wide range for each of them, although some do tend to be more inherited than others, such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The next 3 slides provide brief definitions of some of the disorders that affect transitional age youth and are listed solely for your reference. And we can just move on. The next series of slides are from the National Comorbidity Survey Adolescent Supplement. Despite the fact this study was conducted in 2004, it continues to be the most referenced data on the prevalence of psychiatric, neurodevelopmental, and behavioral disorders among United States youth aged 13 through 18. Its relevance is not only based on its sample size of more than 10,000 individuals, but its design and implementation by many of the top psychiatric epidemiologists in the United States. The DSM-4 was an earlier version of the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It was updated to the DSM-4 TR, Transitional, in 2000, and most recently updated to the current DSM-5 in 2013. The changes involved with these revisions do not significantly affect the major diagnostic classes nor the specific diagnostic criteria for major disorders used in the NCSA supplement. This slide shows that almost 50% of the adolescents surveyed had a mental illness, and among this group, 22% had a serious mental illness. Among those with serious mental illness, mood disorders were the most frequent, followed by anxiety and behavior disorders. This slide shows the lifetime prevalence of various classes of disorders among the 49% who had any mental illness or disorder. The percentages add up to more than 100% because 40% of adolescents in this group had 2 classes of lifetime disorders. What's not reflected here is the percentage of people who had 3, 4, multiple disorders as well. Note the high percentage of those with 2 classes of lifetime disorders, which frequently we would describe as dual diagnosis, which is typically substance abuse or substance use disorder along with another psychiatric illness. This chart shows the estimated risk of various major diagnoses at age 18. In terms of age of onset and progression of mental illness, anxiety disorders occurred earliest, with a steep increase beginning in early childhood and leveling off after age 12. The risk was low for mood and behavior disorders until early adolescence when it increased steadily. Substance use disorders had the latest age of onset with a steep increase in incidence after age 15. The leading cause of death among U.S. adolescents are motor vehicle accidents, which drugs and alcohol are often a contributing factor. After accidents, suicide is the second leading cause of death among individuals aged 15 to 24 in the United States. Yet less than 40% of youth at risk for suicide ever receive treatment. Overall, there is an estimated 8 to 10-year delay between the onset of mental illness and the receipt of treatment. Given the high rates of suicide and the fact that 50% of all chronic lifetime cases of mental illness begin by age 14 and 75% by age 24, this is unacceptable. It is critical that we urgently prioritize and adequately fund routine diagnostic screening and proven treatments and interventions for youth. An important area of unmet need involves the education of foster caretakers regarding mental and other disabilities that may affect foster youth. Often abuse occurs because caretakers lack an understanding of underlying mental and developmental disabilities that may be the cause of disruptive behaviors. Youth who age out of foster care at age 18 are less likely to graduate from high school, attend college, and obtain stable employment. They are more likely to become homeless and lack access to the most basic health care. In contrast, Youth who are able to remain in foster care beyond age 18 are more likely to obtain a high school diploma, attend college, increase their lifetime earnings, and achieve financial independence. The percentages of mental illness and severe mental illness are much higher for incarcerated youth compared with the NCSA supplement findings. 65 to 70% versus 49% for any mental illness, and 30% versus 22% for severe mental illness. The most common diagnoses for incarcerated boys are oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder, considered behavior disorders, often with the additional diagnosis of ADHD and/or alcohol dependence. The most common diagnosis for incarcerated girls is depression, often with additional diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder and/or alcohol dependence. Research suggests that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is 4 to 5 times more prevalent in correctional facilities than in schools. And an estimated 12% of incarcerated youth are diagnosed with intellectual disabilities. Involvement with juvenile justice and foster care represent risk factors. A risk factor is anything that increases the likelihood that a person will experience harm and a poor transition into adulthood. Other examples of risk factors include living in poverty, being a person of color, experiencing early single parenthood, living in unsafe home or community environments, and substance use. On the positive side, a protective factor is something that decreases the potential harmful effects of a risk factor and increases the likelihood that a person will experience a successful transition into adulthood. Most risk and protective factors are influenced by or involved environmental conditions. For example, a willingness to please adults listed under the individual protective factors here would likely be positively influenced by emotional support and physical safety provided by parents and adult mentors versus an unstable or an unsafe family environment. Another example might be the influence of positive and healthy friendships and shared activities with peers versus involvement with a street gang. So why are we focusing on employment? Among its many benefits, employment is considered a fundamental component of recovery and essential for a good quality of life. There are a number of evidence-based models and programs that promote employment among youth. Some have a primary focus on employment and others do not, yet they all share similar principles and practices. The Transition to Independence, or TIP model, is an evidence-based approach that supports early engagement with youth in multiple life domains, including education and employment, and promotes their successful transition into adulthood. Another proven program is Assertive Community Treatment, or ACT. A key component of ACT is its multidisciplinary approach that provides a comprehensive array of services tailored to the needs of each individual, including supported education and supported employment. ACT was initially developed for adults with severe and persistent mental illness and has now been adapted for transitional age youth and other populations. As with ACT, Individual Placement Support, or IPS, is a model of supported employment initially developed for adults with serious mental illness. Both have since been adapted for adolescents and young adults. A key component of the IPS model is its focus on a place and train versus a train and place approach. Studies have shown that individuals receiving IPS services are 2.4 times more likely to be employed than those who are not. The next series of slides outline essential features of successful vocational programs for transitional age youth, featuring guidelines developed by the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth. An essential component are staff who maximize engagement with the youth whom they serve. Successful engagement requires that all staff develop and maintain a knowledge of community resources that youth need, a blend of knowledge of mental health and work development strategies, and a balance between the expertise and guidance adults can provide with the peer support and sense of empowerment youth provide each other. In today's world, young people are literally texting all the time. Many have created avatars through interactive sites and video games which have no basis in reality. It has become increasingly important that youth have a physical place where they can be real among their peers. Successful programs like Mental Health America of Los Angeles' Tay Academy provides youth centers. In places of their own, youth can engage in non-virtual communication and social interactions, which are critical for meaningful human development and interpersonal relationships. The most successful programs also have an anywhere, anytime treatment approach, where counseling and all other services can be integrated into daily activities that can range from hanging out in a cafe to playing pool. Successful programs also utilize assessment tools, tools which focus on the strengths of the individual and which facilitate the development of effective person-centered service plans and good outcomes for youth. We would never consider hospitalizing a person without providing them a room with a bed. How then can we expect a young person to be successful and thrive without a safe and stable place to sleep and live? And finally, the most successful vocational programs involve a place and train approach, and perhaps most importantly, a primary commitment to give each young person a voice in their future and to support them at whatever stage they may be in the vocational process and their lives. Lastly, this quote is my final wish to each youth and young adult. Let their voices be heard and their spirits soar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break now and come back and hear from our programs that actually are providing these kinds of services in the community. Are you going to introduce ICO?
Huh?
Are you going to introduce ICO?
Or should I just start?
No, we've introduced,
it's nice to meet you,
Naveen
man.
introduced Iko and Michael and the good doctor.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to have to get started soon because we saved the best for last.
Okay.
That's
Thank you. Can you hear? Okay. My name's Aiko Matsumura, and I'm one of the program managers from Starlight Community Services. Starlight's a community-based agency that provides services, behavioral health and mental health services for children, adolescents, and transitional age youth. Most of our contracts come through the Santa Clara County Behavioral Health. To provide a snapshot, Starlight is actually part of a bigger company, STARS Behavioral Health Group, which was established 30 years ago. SBHG has program sites all over California, so we extend as south as Riverside County and move all the way up to Sacramento County. The program I'm here to talk about today is the Full Service Partnership Program. The FSP program has funding from the Mental Health Services Act, also known as Proposition 63, which was established in 2005. The purpose of the Mental Health Services Act was to connect children, families, and adults with disabling mental health illnesses. So when youth receive the FSP program and enter our program, they can have a variety of, it's a full service, so therapeutic services, case management services, psychiatry. They can get connected with a peer worker, a peer advocate, or a parent partner to provide support for not just the young person, but the whole family. I took a snapshot of the youth that we served that were coming into our program all of last year and into this spring, just to get an idea of where the referrals are coming from. So most of our youth, as you can see, are ages 16 to 18. In our county, a lot of our programs, the family and children programs, cap out at age 18. So it's really common for a lot of young persons coming at 16, 17, getting ready for adulthood, to be referred to the Full Service Partnership Program to kind of help them transition into adulthood. Each of our youth are required to meet a criteria for a DSM diagnosis. So having a mental health diagnosis is the focus of the treatment and how it affects them in their daily life functioning. So almost half of our youth have come in with a mood disorder. So that can be major depression, dysthymia, bipolar disorder, and then a good chunk of our youth have been impacted by psychosis-related ones, like schizophrenia, and, as mentioned in the video, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, while our youth will have a primary mental health diagnosis, they will also have secondary and some even tertiary diagnoses. So it's really common for our youth to have not just, let's say, depression, but they can have a co-occurring substance use disorder, or a third diagnosis of multiple mental health disorders, and then throwing in substances in there as well. At intake, all of our youth are screened for a variety of risk factors. So risk factors such as suicidality, self-harm, harm to others, violence, substances, and a history of trauma. So most of our youth that are coming into our FSP program have had exposure to a traumatic experience. And examples of trauma can be abuse, neglect, sexual assault, physical assault, community violence. So as the film talked about, not just experiencing it, but also could be having witnessed it. And because most of our youth have experiences with co-occurring issues such as trauma and substance use in addition to their mental health diagnosis, it was really important for us to get trained in a variety of evidence-based practices to target the complex issues that our youth are facing. So most of our team members are trained in models such as trauma-focused CBT, seeking safety, and motivational interviewing. In terms of referral, most of our referrals are coming in through the Santa Clara County's call center. So anyone can call into the call center and share about some of the challenges that they're having and get linked to the appropriate program that matches their needs. What we do have a lot of is mental health urgent care or level 1. And level 1 referrals are basically maybe if a youth is coming out of a psychiatric hospital, being discharged from urgent care, and needing immediate access to psychiatry for the medication management component.
Another big source of referrals is really internally. So Starlight has a variety of family and children programs that are going from outpatient level, school-based program, and it's really common for youth that are getting closer to 18 to be stepped up because they have a higher need. Or we also have a wraparound program that actually caps out at 18. So oftentimes we'll see the wrap providers try to refer their youth into the FSP program, so it's a more smooth transition. There's a variety of factors that are related to one being eligible for a program. Really, the general idea is a youth has a mental health diagnosis that's affecting them in their daily life functioning. So whether it's in the home, community, in the school, because of the primary mental health issues, they're at risk of entering the juvenile justice system or entering a hospital. On the other end, it's about if a youth is aging out of the foster care program or completing probation, how do we support them to not regress? And that's why FSP is providing the intensive wraparound support to be able to support that transition. So our services are really inspired by the transition to independent process model that Janice spoke to. The model really focuses on how do we partner with a young person to engage in identifying their strengths, what are their interests, what do you feel like is the main priority for you in your treatment, whether it's getting employment or finishing school or moving out on your own. Really, it's guided by the young person, and then we figure out how can the team support you with creating actionable steps. So breaking it down to be more appeasable. And then the team supports with all the steps along the way of, if a young person wants to get a job, we can help with building a resume. We can help with prepping for a job interview. Once they get the job, we can help them with role-playing on certain conflict resolution issues or things that are going to get in the way of them keeping their employment. So most of our youth coming in either have an educational goal that's connected to future employment or an employment goal. So for the educational goals, most of our youth are on track. So not everyone was in their senior year, let's say, of high school or their senior year of college, so they haven't met the goals yet of getting the diploma. However, most of them are on track. And for the youth that have a goal of acquiring part-time employment or full-time employment, they've mostly been successful, which is a great sign of outcomes. Common barriers that we've found to youth either getting employment or maintaining employment are listed above. So for instance, for substance use, if a youth is using substances actively, whether to self-medicate, whether it's for recreational, some places will do drug testing, and that could be a potential barrier. On the other end, like Edward was able to share, when sometimes a youth is using substances, it's really affecting them in other areas of their life, so it might get in the way of them keeping a position. Other examples include legal problems. So a lot of our youth are on juvenile probation. So they might have certain crimes on their records that might not be, make them eligible for certain positions out in the community. Our program has flex funds through the Mental Health Services Act, which can help with targeting a lot of these barriers. So for instance, if a youth has challenges with transportation, we can purchase a bus pass for the young person. If youth is struggling with getting their GPA up to be able to get a worker's permit to get the job, what we do is say, hey, let's link you up with a tutor. We know a tutor that has experience working with youth. Let's tackle that barrier one step at a time. I think the more difficult challenges has been, as Janice mentioned, the negative peer influences. So a lot of our youth are affected by the gang culture, and trying to kind of tackle more legal ways of getting employment could be maybe not as big of a motivator. And so depending on who the youth surrounds himself by, having positive adults that expect age-appropriate, healthy employment goals, that could be an important piece to focus on. So on the other end, things that we've seen that have really supported our youth with getting employment. When a young person has confidence in themselves, is optimistic about getting employment, and is motivated to follow through on those tasks, we all know there's like 100 steps that are required to get a job and to keep a job. So the youth that are able to kind of develop those skills and use the team for support in addressing those skills or enhancing those skills have been more successful. So in addition to the TIP model, we incorporate 2 other models that were introduced to us in the last 5+ years, I would say, through our county. Transformational care planning, we also call it TCP, is a model that focuses on building on the young person's strengths, helping them collaborate with their providers, and build a treatment plan that meets their needs. That goes really hand in hand with a TIP model about engagement and tailoring services so they can guide the treatment. Another piece is, as we talked about, the significant impact of trauma and understanding what does it look like in the sessions? What does it look like of the young person in developing relationships, being triggered in the workforce? So being mindful of how trauma interacts and presents with all of our youth and affects their path to recovery is a huge piece that we're constantly having discussions about. And I wanted to end a little bit on the 7 guidelines. So the TIP model does have 7 guidelines. So we already talked about the piece about engagement and working with a young person, prevention planning on risky situations or behaviors that could get in the way of them getting employment. It's also really important for us to tailor services so they're accessible. We are technically a 24/7 contract, so our youth have access to us to be able to target some of their triggers and stressors that could get in the way of their employment. Helping the young person understand the consequences of their actions. So yes, we want to set up our youth to succeed. However, we also want to give them the chance to feel some of the natural consequences so they can learn from decision making how they have a big role in their success. Tying in key players is huge. So we wrap around not just with the youth, but with the whole family. So if there's a family member that can be a supportive asset to the young person, if there's a teacher or a coach or a music instructor, anyone out in the community that can support and create a safety net for this young person, we're always trying to encourage that. Also being mindful of what are the age-appropriate adult skills, decision-making, self-management, communication, conflict resolution, all these things that are associated with becoming an adult, we're trying to equip our young persons with. And then, of course, being mindful of the outcomes. Are our young persons being successful with the interventions that we're implementing? We have to hold ourselves responsible to support the young person, not just on an individual level, but on a programmatic level. And then involving the youth in the TIP system. So having positions such as peer mentors, peer advocates, having them part of the program is an important piece about providing peer support for our youth. And that's just it. That's my contact information if you have any other questions, and feel free to use the references. Question.
So I'd like to know how this program is funded.
So through Mental Health Services Act, so we have a contract through Santa Clara County Behavioral Health. So they provide contracts to varying providers, and so we go up for bid.
Okay, so if somebody self-refers to your program, what would be the process?
They can call the call center, or they can reach out. They have to have full scope Medi-Cal or no insurance, which is funded by the Mental Health Services Act.
So it's only Medi-Cal or no insurance?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And full scope, would you explain what that is?
So not just like partial coverage, but covering all of mental health services.
And covering dental and
Mm-hmm.
full scope is that all aspects of healthcare are covered, whereas there are some Medi-Cal programs that
Mhm.
only cover, say, mental health or physical health or a portion, but it's not considered full scope. It's a special category of Medi-Cal.
Is wraparound a term that's still used today?
Mhm.
Okay.
I had another question too. Where do you refer people once they age out of your program? Where do they go?
They can, so most of the time they're able to meet their goals and graduate much sooner than 25. We've had some youth where we can support their transition to the adult programs. So there's also an adult FSP program and an adult outpatient program.
And what was the first thing, an adult what?
Oh, sorry, an adult FSP. So this FSP program targets transitional age youth, and then there's also an adult version.
Okay, thanks.
That woman in the back has a question.
Hi, I live in Santa Clara County. I'm curious, the Santa Clara Valley Health Plan,
Mm-hmm.
are you covered under them?
No, we are not.
Because that's a Medi-Cal, and most of the people in Medi-Cal
Mhm.
go under that HMO, so
Mhm.
interesting. Okay, next question. if they meet the criteria as for services, like a lot, they're at risk of, juvenile hall or whatever it is, but they happen to be a regional center client, and they happen to have both mental health and maybe autism, can they access your program?
We've actually had youth that have both a connection with SARC as well as our program. As long as our focus is on the mental health piece, which is really hard to delineate, right? Because a lot of it's just so co-occurring, we can collaborate with the other provider.
Will SARC fund it?
So, no, it would not be SARC funding the FSP program.
Okay, so it's one or the other. This brings up a big problem, in terms of silos,
Yeah.
putting people into, you either have a mental health problem or you have autism.
Yes.
And then you go to the autism employment programs and they say, oh, they're too behaviorally challenged to enter our program. We cannot accept them. And then you have people fall in the cracks. So I'm just making a comment.
I didn't address this in the diagnostic categories, but one of the big problems with just the definition of a behavior disorder is that a behavior is not a diagnosis. And we talk about conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. Many clinicians, including myself, do not believe those should be categorized as diagnoses because they represent behaviors as opposed to something we see as being a brain disease. And they cannot necessarily even be linked. And as it is, we don't have any markers, any physical markers for any of the mental illnesses that are categorized in the DSM anyway. So in that regard, I think that it is a big problem. And it's also a problem in trying to hospitalize someone from a regional center for a psychiatric disorder. They are turned away because they supposedly have a behavior disorder and they don't have a mental illness. So it's been used to, as you're saying, to basically defer and deter people from getting admission to hospitals and other services.
And just what I'd like to hear from the panel, if there are any programs that serve behaviorally challenged, normal IQ adults with autism. So far, I've not been able to find them. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know.
Camilla?
Are these services here in San Francisco only?
So the program that I'm speaking about is for Santa Clara County.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Michael Shockett with Kaminar, and Kaminar is headquartered in San Mateo County, and we recently acquired Family Children's Services of Santa Clara County, and Healthy Partnerships in Solano County, and just recently Project 90 in San Mateo County. And these programs work with folks with substance abuse and alcohol problems. Kaminar runs a wide array of programs in San Mateo County, Solano County, Butte County, and here in San Francisco and Santa Clara County. And Jobs Plus is the vocational arm of Kaminar, and we've been doing this for 26 years. And it all started when I was running a residential program called Eucalyptus House in 1990, and we were working with Napa State Hospital, and they discharged about 5 youth to our program, ranging in age from 18 to 20, and it almost took the house down. You can imagine all of the stuff that was going on in this residential program, from alcohol to drugs and everything else in between. And I decided we've got some connections with the city council, Daly City City Council, and I took these youth and we set up lunches, made lunches, and delivered it to Daly City Council meetings. And it was amazing what I saw. these young folks weren't acting out, they weren't clients, they weren't patients, they were engaged and they wanted to work. And from there, we started our Jobs Plus program with startup money or an establishment grant from the Department of Rehabilitation, and the rest is more or less history. Basically, our age group, as you can see, is 18 to 24 and 25 on up. But what's interesting is I've been with this agency and doing this work for 38 years. And of the age group, there are a handful of folks now that I've also known since they were 18 years old that have gone through the program, that have gone to work, that have gotten housing, that have made friends, that have gotten married, and it's unbelievable to see that. The ages that we serve and the diagnoses are similar to the other programs that were talked about this afternoon. And there are, again, the diagnosis is also co-occurring with a lot of substance abuse on top of the mental health issues and just a lot of stuff that's going on with these young folks. And the idea is not so much, in my opinion, is to focus on the diagnosis, but to focus on the person's ability to go to work and to establish a relationship with their employment specialist so they can become successful. So these are some of our caseloads, and when you see what's referred to as someone that's been closed successfully, that's somebody that's been working for 3 months or more. Since we work with the Department of Rehabilitation, usually after 3, 4, 5 months, when a person is doing well, they're closed successfully. And these are some of the jobs that we place folks in at Kaminar Jobs Plus. We have 3 employment specialists here in San Francisco that work with folks and meet them where they're at. And a lot of these jobs may seem entry level, but when you're working with somebody that's young, it's their first job. And what's interesting is, as we all know, youth go through many, many different jobs, whether you have a barrier to employment or not. Everybody here at one point when you were 16, 17, or 18 certainly didn't make a career out of Blockbuster Video. You moved on and went from job to job. And with our youth, we try and place them in jobs that are a little bit hip, whether it be a gaming store or Abercrombie or American Eagle, in an environment where they're working with their peers and to develop relationships and to start their new life. So there's a variety of backgrounds where people come from, as you can see up above. And the saddest part is I remember going to one of the temporary foster homes in San Mateo County. I took a tour there, and it's just amazing when you hear the stories of these kids and their upbringing and the struggles that they had. And I remember after that tour, we were able to get 2 referrals from the program and put these people to work, and it's just mind-blowing the changes that you see. So the referrals come from the 5 different clinics in San Mateo County, as well as Kaiser Permanente, but Kaminar Jobs Plus is a vendor with the State of California Department of Rehabilitation. So they more or less hire us to place their clients, but we do all the navigation to help somebody fill out the paperwork for the Department of Rehabilitation and to get them open with us. And here in San Francisco, we're part of a cooperative program. We're in partnerships with 4 other agencies to provide vocational and employment services. And some of the services that we provide are certainly skill assessments. So if a young person isn't quite sure what they want to do, we'll put them in what's called an assessment or a sample work trial, maybe at Whole Foods or at Factory to You, where they can try out a job over a 40-hour period over 2 weeks and see where they're at. And then after that, a report is written, and if they want to go on to more serious employment, that's what we do. And then the key element to success, what was talked about earlier, is job coaching. And that's really key. And you may ask, well, why would an 18-year-old want somebody hanging around with them at a job site? And the key is not to have the coach do the job for them, but to support them. And our job coaches are like caterers. You go to a party, there's always food at the table, but rarely do you see the caterer. And it's the same thing that we try and do with a job coach, is make them invisible, but to be able to provide the support they need to help them get through their 90-day probation. And one of the evidence-based practices that's talked about a lot is IPS, and that's a rapid job placement. So you strike the fire while it's hot and try to eliminate all the red tape to get somebody open and stop talking about pre-vocational stuff and going to many job clubs. But when a young person wants to go to work, that's the whole idea of IPS, is to get them working as quickly as possible, and then we'll address whatever areas are needed. So how do we know that employment works? Well, all the stats are up there. And you also know that it works when you get testimonials from young folks that reach out and spread the word about how it's changed their lives. And that's really the bottom line, is hearing it from the source and hearing it from these two gentlemen here, Alex and Edward, of how they've overcome their barriers and set a goal for themselves to go to work. And that's the type of message that they need to spread out to other youth, because very rarely does a 16, 17, or 18-year-old want to hear something from a 40 or 50-year-old or somebody that's in the bureaucratic system. They want to hear it from somebody that's closer to their age, that's been there and done that. So thank you, gentlemen. Then, let me skip a slide. And these are some of the factors that may influence vocational success. And my belief is it's the relationship that the youth has with their employment specialist and meeting them where they're at and developing a trusting relationship and being able not only to talk about employment, but to talk about other issues that are going on. And then again, why our program works. Our program works because we are person-centered planning. We do meet the person where they're at, and we also provide 24/7 coverage in the form of job coaching if somebody is working any type of variety of shifts, and we've had that happen a lot. So again, you know, the bottom line is a lot of talk is discussed about wellness and recovery, and my feeling is you can't have wellness and recovery without being able to provide employment and or school. Somebody usually wants to go to school to get a better education, to get a better job. Somebody may be working in an entry-level job and want to go back to school to get more education. So that's my conclusion of my presentation. Any questions?
I just wanted you to address a little more about, I think what's interesting is ICO's program approaches it from the mental health kind of global multi-domains. You approach it from the employment domain, but both of you incorporate the same multiple domains. Talk a little bit about how you network with other programs to provide the mental health and housing and other.
Well, at Kaminar, we have our own, we have supported housing, we have supported education, we have a med clinic, we have our own psychiatrist. So it's a one-stop type of agency. and we have a specific youth program, young adult independent living called Yale. So we're trying to move towards more integrated health. So a one-stop program where a youth can have a primary physician as well as having a psychiatrist if needed, and then our employment team can be embedded with the team of case managers and medical treatment and psychiatric treatment, which is very important.
Mike, I have a quick question. Is there like a specific criteria that the program has to follow in order to qualify for the program, or anyone can join?
So anybody that has a barrier to employment is pretty much eligible, and we help navigate the paperwork to get open with the Department of Rehabilitation. And of course, they make the final say-so, but we've never had any real big problems. Yes.
I saw you had a category of other for different jobs that they can get. If a client has a really specific idea of what kind of job they want, say in a corporate environment, would you be able to help them?
Yes. So we don't have a listing of employers that we put people in. Okay, we customize our job development to what the person wants. And we also work with people with higher level master's degrees, people with law degrees that relapse and have an illness, and that's part of the other category. So whatever job somebody is looking for, we will tailor that to their vocational goal.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Hi, do you accept GGRC funding or straight Medi-Cal?
Yes, we're vendors with Golden Gate Regional Center and San Andreas and Far Northern Regional Center. So in Butte County, we provide a lot of services to people with autism, and then we also work with the regional centers, GGRC and SARC, to provide employment services.
So you actually go into Santa Clara County as well?
We're in Santa Clara County. We're doing a lot of job coaching in Santa Clara County for SARC clients. So to answer your question earlier, yes, we could possibly help you out.
Well, it's just I know a number of people. It's not just, so you will take behaviorally challenged individuals sometimes?
Yes, if it's a referral from SARC or from a regional center and the behavioral issues, if it's the key is if somebody has a strong desire and motivation to work, that's what we focus on. The rest we can deal with. It may take some time, but that's what we deal with because that's what's key. It's not having their brother or their mother or their father or friend saying, well, you need to go to work, because that's not going to happen. If somebody truly wants to go to work, then we can work with them, and we have success in placing those folks.
And then you mentioned you have a 40-hour, sort of try out different jobs.
Right, so if somebody doesn't...
Less than 40? I mean, or is 40 hour
It's usually 40 over a 2-week period, because usually the first 3 to 4 days, it's a honeymoon period. Somebody will show up to work, everything's fine and dandy, and then as you get more into it, well, I stubbed my toe, I had an argument with my roommate, so issues come up.
Thank you, Michael.
Excuse me, I just have a question. So these services seem to be outside of San Francisco. How does someone in San Francisco?
We have a program here in San Francisco where we work with folks that have barriers to employment. We work with the Department of Rehabilitation. So we have a co-op program. We work with people with mental health issues, with intellectual disabilities, all types of disabilities, hearing impaired, visually impaired.
Do we go through Kaminar?
Yes, the contact information is in the handout on the last slide. You call us up and we'll help you navigate the process.
Thank you.
A question, do you have a partnership with probation?
We don't have a direct partnership probation, but we have worked with a lot of folks with criminal backgrounds.
But how do you get the case management services?
folks with a criminal background, you mean through probation?
San Francisco, they have a section which will do case management and help people on probation.
Right, so if anybody has a criminal background and they're interested in working, we will partner.
You will partner with
Of course.
that county? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to have to move on to Social Security and SSI work incentive programs with an emphasis on SSI. SSI is the poverty program, as many of you know. Disability insurance benefits is the regular insurance benefits for people who have been working and requires 20 of 40 hours insurance to be covered, which is the same as 5 out of 10 years. However, as you can see from the slide, between the ages of 21 and 31, someone could be insured with as little as 3 out of 6 quarters. 3 quarters is 18 months, so 18 months out of 3 years. Now, this only applies to younger individuals. Pardon me?
Just talking to the mic.
Oh, this only applies to younger individuals. So it's very common when people say they're on SSI and have started working that they'll actually be concurrently on both programs due to this lower amount of insurance quarters of coverage to be eligible for SSDI, also known as Title II, and also get Medicare in addition to Medi-Cal. So the rules are different for younger individuals in that respect. SSI, is a program that, besides the medical requirements of disability, has non-medical income and resource eligibility requirements. And every year there's a redetermination to make sure someone is neither over-resourced or over-income. The resource level has not changed since 1974, and that is a total of $2,000 in any kind of savings. It could be a savings account, it could be 401k, it could be stocks, bonds, life insurance, for a total of $2,000. Now, if someone has $2,005, let's say for over 2 years, they'll get a notice of overpayment asking that they repay every single check, the total check they received for 2 years, because they've been over-resourced and are not required. And it comes in the mail. It can be appealed, but they are very restrictive. People on SSI must report income, whether earned or unearned. Unearned could be any kind of a gift. It could be an inheritance. It could be someone saying, here's a couple $100, buy yourself food for the next 6 months, or money for clothing, as opposed to giving someone clothing and food. That is, if someone gives cash, it'll be subtracted from their check dollar for dollar. And it wasn't that long ago when they exempted things like pots and pans, clothing, and food. It was countable up till very recently. Now, unearned income, as I said, is anything that's not earned. There always are exceptions, and these rules are sort of complicated. However, for example, on unearned income, for Title II benefits, and again, people can concurrently be on both programs. They may get retroactive SSDI. They will have 9 months to do what's called a spend down. in-kind support and maintenance is very important, because if someone is getting room and board, but let's just say don't have to pay rent in an apartment, and they're also given 100 or 200 for food, the 100 or 200 will be subtracted directly from the check. The point is that they're going to get 1/3 of their check reduced, whether it's room and or board. So if who's ever, maybe it's a relative or parents or child to parents, it's important to know that if you're going to give someone board or a free place to stay, it's not going to cost the SSI recipient any more by also giving them food. As opposed to cash for food, it's going to be the same deduction, the 1/3 in-kind support and maintenance. Now, gifts, I won't spend too much time, but dollar for dollar, it's going to be subtracted. So if someone wants someone to have clothing, give them the clothing. Don't give them $100 or $200 to buy clothing, like on a birthday. Someone may say, here's $500. That is going to be subtracted dollar for dollar from the check. And there are some exceptions, as you can see. Tuition, certain kinds of educational expenses can be set aside for 9 months. And exceptions, most of us would never even think of the value of domestic travel tickets. Domestic meaning as opposed to international. SSI eligibility redetermination procedures every year, but actually it could be every other year. They're a little slow in doing this. They do an eligibility redetermination, and they have someone come into the office, the Social Security DO or field office, with every check account and lease, and they want to make sure they didn't go over the resource limit of $2,000, or that they don't have any income, whether it's earned or unearned. And that's when sometimes they'll be ceased, meaning terminated, and just as often retroactively from whenever they were over-resourced. And there are complications when they didn't know about it. Let's say they're severely disabled and their mother is the payee. I've seen cases where the child, severely disabled, maybe nonverbal autistic, the mother balances the checkbook and it goes over $2,000 to $2,005, and I have to pay back $30,000. In other words, every single check for every month when they were $5 over the $2,000 limit. So it may sound like it's a small amount and this shouldn't happen, but of course it really does happen. The age 18 redetermination is something that happens to every individual upon turning age 18. In other words, the child rules, and that is medical rules, apply for anyone who's not 18 yet. But upon their 18th birthday, they get a notice and they apply the adult rules. Now, children don't work. We have child labor laws. I'm speaking generally. I mean, someone who's 17 may be able to get a job, but Social Security will do a redetermination of eligibility for benefits. And at age 18, And the student example where someone could, if they're regularly attending school and not married and meet other requirements, they can continue until they're 22 years old. Now, students are in a category where there are exceptions in terms of the numbers of hours a week. It's not enough to sign up for school and not go enough hours. It's not going to work. They must attend at least 8 hours per week. If it's grades 7 through 12, it's 12 hours a week. And during vocational rehabilitation, they must attend 15 hours per week and attend 12 hours per week under other circumstances. Now, it can be, it can be less hours if it's something outside of the beneficiary's control. Let's say they get very sick and they're in the hospital. Now, being in the hospital is not always an excuse, just like being in prison is not an excuse to miss a deadline for appeal. And these sound very restrictive because they are. And the theory beyond, for example, if someone's in prison, they can't miss the 60-day deadline for appeal is because you can mail a letter from prison. So that is not good cause for late filing of an appeal. Now, work reviews, I'm not going to spend much time on because we're focusing on SSI, the poverty program, but CDRs is the common name for medical reviews, continuing disability reviews, and the burden is on Social Security to show there has been improvement, that is, medical improvement. Work reviews over the past several years has increased exponentially, and Congress has told them to keep conducting work reviews, and that gets complicated, but we won't go into it too much on SSDI. On SSI, I'd say the best work incentive rule is what I call the 2-for-1 rule. For every $2 you earn, they will subtract $1 from the check. Now, there's also a $65 pass-through, which means it's not counted at all. And if you look at this chart, you'll see if someone earns $1,665 and they do everything by the month, they'll subtract the pass-through of 65, and then you'll have $1,600 is left. The 2-for-1 rule means the countable earnings are $800, and the half of the earnings, of course, is $800, given they're earning, well, it's $1,665 minus the 65, 2-for-1. It's also noteworthy that someone could get down to zero very easily, but still be on the rolls. Everything's month to month, and they may get zero, but that doesn't mean the Medi-Cal is going to be simultaneously cut off. Those deadlines work a little differently, and Social Security or SSI does not cease Medi-Cal the same time that the checks stop. And employment supports there's three major kinds. One is IRWEs, impairment-related work expense. Now, to have an IRWE, the beneficiary, him or herself, must pay. Now, let's say it's a job coach or an ILS trainer. ILS trainer is as important as a job coach to a lot of people who would not be able to live independently. Independent living skills trainer. They would not be able to go out, get cash, go to the store, get food, prepare a meal. They would more likely eat cold hot dogs or something. They're extremely important for people with developmental disabilities to survive in any kind of living. Usually it's a shared residence where there may be 5 residents, or even if there's only 2 in an apartment, or even 1. Now, they are deductions, and you should think of it as they're not going to result in the check being less. Other employment supports, employer subsidies, which is not like accommodations, it's different, but it's when somebody gets paid for doing the same work that his or her co-employees are doing, then you can subtract that. It doesn't have to be a relative, but sometimes it's more easy to think about an uncle or an aunt or someone who gives someone a job, but the individual disabled beneficiary does less work for the same pay. Or let's say someone has a panic attack maybe just once a week and has to go somewhere to be by himself for an hour or 2 while he's having the panic attack, and he's not going to be docked in pay. That is called an employer subsidy, and it's the second kind of work incentive. The last kind may be the more common, and that is special conditions. I'm not sure where it is in this in these slides, but page 13.
What slide number?
Um,
in the blue box? Thank you.
Oh, special conditions are under employment supports. Well, okay, and special conditions is when, for example, I've had a client who was driving a truck making deliveries at night. He could not do that, and his girlfriend was in the truck. First of all, he couldn't navigate by himself. He was having blackouts, and he had help, basically. That is called a special condition, and so whatever his pay was, let's say $2,000, the judge could reduce it, let's say, by half to $1,000. So when you talk about employer subsidies, IRWEs, impairment-related work expense, or special conditions, you're getting the amount down. So if it's Title II, they don't go over the SG amount, which in the year 2018 is $1,180. Once you're at that rate, you're not disabled. Even if you're blind and quadriplegic, you are not disabled if you make that much. For SSI, it's going to make a difference in not reducing your check. So they do apply to both programs. They're very important, even though these rules are sort of complicated, special conditions, earwees and employer subsidies are important because people get a notice, a 15-day notice, and on the notice it says, we have determined to cease you from your benefits, and you have 15 days to respond, and we're ceasing you retroactively for 168 months, which happens to be 14 years. Now, it could be 12 years, 144 months, and then you have to be able to look into every single job that the individual has had all those years and apply employer subsidies, impairment-related work expense, special conditions, and unsuccessful work attempts, which I'm looking, well, let me just put it this way. Unsuccessful work attempts are not countable, and it can't last over 6 months. So someone tries to work, and it's an unsuccessful work attempt based on disability. And they simplified this. They had one rule from 0 to 3 months and another from 4 to 6. So now it's just from 0 to 6, and it's not countable. Sometimes there's a conflict with that and income averaging, where they average over 12 months your earnings. And that works adversely for the beneficiary because if it's not countable at all, income averaging, which in some cases helps, will defeat the work incentive benefit of the unsuccessful work attempt. After 6 months, it is no longer rebuttable. So we have here what I'm talking about. UWA's 6 months, simpler now. You don't go 0 to 3 and 4 to 6. It's just up to 6 months. And these concepts, imagine that someone who has severe anxiety, let's just say schizophrenia and or autism and severe depression, multiple suicide attempts, sometimes ideation and attempts, and they get a 15-day notice. It's very difficult for, I would say, most individuals with these kinds of severe disabilities to not lose sleep at night and then apply all these rules.
That's why nobody wants to go to work.
And miss, and not to miss the time for appeal, and then 2 weeks after they get that notice, and you have to be prepared for those attorneys in here when they come into your office and show you the 15-day notice of cessation. You have to be prepared to tell them that in less than 2 weeks, they're going to get a notice of overpayment, computer generated. So if it is 144 months, which equals 12 years, it's going to be, you say, well, it may be $90,000 to $100,000. Now, these people are living month to month, and they're very worried when that happens about being evicted and out on the street, maybe with their cat. That was one of my first clients. It's just a lot of anxiety that's created by this, and let me just move forward to sheltered workshops. I think in a sheltered workshop, not that I think, it's generally not considered under the Social Security definition of substantial gainful activity in work. However, For people on SSI, they do count the earnings in determining the monthly benefit amount. So even though it's a sheltered, let's say it's for people with intellectual disabilities and people who are not capable of working in competitive employment, they are going to be counting the earnings in a sheltered workshop. And if on most of these, at the bottom, you see the regulations section, if anyone really wanted to look it up. Now, another SSI program is the PASS. The PASS, a lot of you may have heard of, the Plan to Achieve Self-Support. A lot of people don't know much about it. It's been around, I guess, for 25 years. Social Security at one point was thinking about putting up posters in their office so maybe people would see that they have such a thing. And that's an income sheltering program. And so it's, if someone is on both programs concurrently, they can shelter the Title II or SSDI money. Their SSI check would go up to the maximum, let's say round number 800. They have to have a realistic vocational plan, and we recommend they see a vocational rehabilitation counselor to sign off. It is not okay just to put down they'll go to college for 10 years and they're going to get, we've had people come into the office and say they want to be an PhD in astrological biology or something that may not lead to a vocation. So, and it is sent to Baltimore for approval. And people really can go to graduate school for a PhD program and under a PASS. So it really can help. And it's not only to shelter Title II money. Let's say someone inherits $50,000 from their grandmother. So that would be put in the sheltered bank account and used towards the vocational program, the PASS, the Plan to Achieve Self-Support. The Ticket to Work has been a largely unsuccessful program, PASS, signed by Clinton in December 1999. It's a little beyond the scope of this, and it's not like a real ticket or a train ticket. It's really a letter, and people could sign up, and it should happen over 2 consecutive 12-month periods. And there's a milestone approach in terms of paying the voc rehab counselor and or agency. And they are looking at the earnings and counting them. They do agree not to do a CDR. That is the medical review where Social Security has the burden of proving there's medical improvement and they're no longer disabled. So Social Security says they won't do those unless they're already scheduled. Then they'll do it. At the same time, in this statute, they have extended from 36 months to around 74 months the Medicare eligibility. So they don't have to worry about health insurance like they used to before around 2004 when these regulations came out. And then after that, there's buy-ins for the rest of your life. So that is significant in terms of health insurance and work incentive rules. The other things which are, relatively speaking, important is expedited reinstatement is relatively new. And if you file an application for EXR, which stands for Expedited Reinstatement, you have to do it within 60 months, which is 5 years, after you've been terminated. However, it has to be based on the same disability for which you were receiving benefits. So if you say it was orthopedic and now it's something psychological, it will not work. Now, one other major problem that happens with EXRs is that the individual is cut off retroactively again. Well, let's say it's just 5 years. They were no longer disabled because of working, let's say, and they went over the amount or other reasons. According to their rules, they can only be reinstated retroactively 1 year or 12 months. So, which means they're going to owe the overpayment for the difference. So that's 4 years or what, 48 months of checks. So they can be ceased, which means terminated, for retroactively 5 years and reinstated. They sent it back to the state agency called Disability Determination Services, but they can only reinstate up to 12 months. So the differential is an overpayment, which is still owed. However, all in all, the EXR, expedited reinstatement, is very important. We have plenty of time left for what I have, so I want people to ask questions if they want to. Overpayments I'm going to leave out unless someone has a question. Now the girl in the blue sweater has a question.
Hi, I want to go back to the past question.
Yes, the past plan.
Is the past plan similar to a special needs trust where you need to have a trustee and it needs to be approved by Social Security, or is it merely just having a vocational specialist sign off on it?
There are two separate things. Now, Social Security does recognize special needs trust. And unlike before, the individual can set one up as opposed to a third party. That's sort of new. But a past plan is not the same. The other thing that's new, and many of you may have heard of, is the ABLE accounts. And you can put in up to $15,000 a year, which is the same as the tax-free gift, and it can go up to $100,000, and it can be spent on anything disability related. Now this, you can open one in any state that has one. California is a little behind. They're saying October 2018. But even if you open one in Florida or Ohio or somewhere, you can open one now and build it up. The limit right now, I believe, is $100,000 in the ABLE accounts. When you consider the SSI resource limitation has never changed, it's $2,000, and it has been since the creation of the program in '74. The ABLE accounts is quite helpful. It's a federal law, but each state administers the ABLE account, and here it's the California treasurer, state treasurer. It's approved by Treasury, the federal Treasury Department, but it is helpful in view of all these things I've been discussing, namely income and resource, non-disability eligibility requirements for SSI, the poverty program. With that, I'm sorry, there is a question from the young lady in the purple shirt.
Regarding the SSI and adult disabled child benefits that they might get from their parents. When their parents retire, I've seen people get knocked off of SSI because it goes too high, and then they lose their Medi-Cal and their in-home support. I understand there's this thing called the Pickle Amendment. I have two questions.
Well,
The
let
first
me-
one is,
yeah.
how do you prevent losing the Medi-Cal if your SSI is cut off because of adult disabled child benefits
Well,
from the parent?
DAC, or disabled adult child, is something that people want. So I wouldn't cast it in such a negative way. First of all, you're going to get Medicare, and you're also going to get regular Social Security where you're not subject to these income and resource requirement. And you can get it if your parent is either, like you said, retired, disabled, or dead. And it's something that people want, and if they're eligible, should apply for. In terms of having Medi-Cal also, since I think it was 96, they've had buy-in programs, so they could be on both Medi-Cal and Medicare, but anyone on SSI who can get it on the account of a deceased, disabled, or retired parent definitely should apply. They want that. They want to be on regular Social Security and have Medicare also, in addition to Medicaid or Medi-Cal,
They
as we
lose their
call it.
Medi-Cal, or they have to pay a share of cost Medi-Cal, and they lose their in-home support services if they're getting supported living services, you know. So how do you avoid that? I heard something about a pickle amendment that would...
Well, you know, I've heard the word pickle amendment. I'm not familiar with it, but most people do not want to avoid it. Remember, let's say a parent dies and they inherit $500,000. There are no income and resource limitations, and they can collect their Social Security check and get their Medicare. So I don't know who this is who doesn't want that, who'd rather be on this poverty program. You want the DAC, disabled adult child. It's much more beneficial. There may be an exception to it, but they do have some rules, no surprise. You can't get married if you're on DAC, so when people come in for advice, we talk about an annulment. I mean, like with everything else in Social Security, it's a little bureaucratic, and issues like that come up. People on SSI will and should apply for disabled adult children's benefits. It's very advantageous for them for the reasons I said.
And if you start working and you're on DAC, how does that imply the DAC? Is it the same rules as SSI, or?
No, the work incentive, I've focused on SSI, but and the work incentive rules for Title II, which is DAC, are very different. You get a 9-month trial work period and a 36-month extended period of eligibility, and then on the 46th month, 9 plus 36 is 45, so on the 46 months, the hatchet comes down, and so you can keep your earnings under the SGA amount, which this month in 2018 is $1,180. So, I mean, you can or you can apply what I talked about before, the special circumstances, the impairment-related work expense, the unsuccessful work attempt, and employer subsidies, which apply to both. But generally, you have the 9-month trial work period, then the 36-month extended period of eligibility. And remember, the Medicare does not go away. You have it for 94 months or 7.5 years, approximately, and you can buy in for the rest of your life. So on balance, you don't want to be put back on the poverty program. You want to be on the disabled adult children's program. Or for adult children's.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Oh.
People have questions.
So I've been asked by an adult who's used a lot of Medi-Cal services, and he's going to inherit some money pretty soon, and he's worried that he's going to be asked to repay his Medi-Cal expenses. Is that possible?
Repay the Medi-Cal, you mean retroactively
Yes.
you're talking about?
Is there a payback on that?
There is, someone mentioned share of costs. There is such thing as a share of costs. I don't really know about that it's retroactive rather than current and future. You always see it is something that's going to happen. I mean, when the share of costs come up, there's the $600 deduction. Let's say someone makes $1,800 and the share of costs could then be as high as $1,200. But no, retroactively, the answer is no, not retroactively.
Good news.
You can get it retroactively, either one, Medicare and or Medi-Cal. You can get it, but you wouldn't have to pay it back retroactively.
There's another question, I think. Was there another person? Any other questions?
Well, there's
wait.
one more with the young lady in the blue sweater.
Yeah, I'm still on the, if you receive money from an inheritance and Medi-Cal, are you allowed to have CDs, or I don't know, what would a person do with the money to be able to keep Medi-Cal?
Did you say C?
A CD or a 401k, or I don't know where where could you put the money?
A CD or a 401k, and you're talking about someone on SSI?
SSDI.
SSDI, regular Title II.
And they get Medi-Cal.
Well, if they get Medi-Cal, which is a poverty program, the same $2,000 resource rule applies as to SSI. And this is another reason for the DAC thing. You can have millions in the bank with Medicare and SSDI. There are no income and resource eligibility limitations.
Can I ask you what that is, the DAC?
The DAC was a question about a disabled adult child. You get your Social Security, regular, not the poverty program, on the account of another. In this case, it's a parent who is either dead, disabled, or retired.
Okay, I didn't know about that program.
Yes, it's important for people to know about it in the event a parent is one of those three things.
Okay.
And that also explains why most children are on SSI.
I see. Oh, you can only do that if you're on SSI, not SSDI. If the child is on SSDI, they can't use the DAC program?
They can't use the DAC program unless the parent is dead, disabled, or retired.
Right, but I understand the child has to be on SSI in order to be able to qualify for the DAC program.
No.
Oh, okay, okay.
The child doesn't have to be on SSI. If there's a disabled individual who's not on SSI and they file an application for a disabled adult child, they could get on it.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Did Alex have a question?
Yeah, I'm kind of on that program where they tell me that if I'm employed, they'll reduce my Social Security, or if it's in reverse, if I'm not employed, then they increase. I'm trying to get some clarification on that, because I got a little...
If you're unemployed, you said they're going to do what?
Increases benefits.
Increase, but if I'm employed, because right now I'm required to work part-time, they decrease my SSI by...
SSDI, you mean?
Yes.
Where that comes from is they're talking theoretically in the future. In other words, the amount of the benefit check is determined by your PIA. PIA is the primary insurance amount, which is determined by your earnings record. So as you earn more money, your checks will go up over time. It's sort of like all the people on SSI who start working. They're on both programs concurrently, and then eventually their SSDI is unearned income and will be subtracted from the SSI, and then the SSI will go to zero. It's sort of the same concept. So if you're earning money by working, and in your example, you will develop the quarters of coverage, and you will concurrently be on both Title II SSDI and Title 16, which is SSI. But they're talking that's how it works in theory and in the future.
Yeah, because
It's not as simple as whoever told you that. It's not that simple.
I know, because the way I was told, it was honestly pretty complicated. I'm like, what?
Well, they weren't explaining it correctly.
I know.
I mean, it's nice to hear that. But you'll find, when we prepared for this seminar, someone said, well, most of our agency's clients are in SSI, but most of those people, once they've worked 18 months, which is just a year and a half, out of the last 3 years, they will not just be on SSI, they will be on both SSI and SSDI, and then there'll come a point where the SSDI goes up, it's subtracted, it's unearned income from the SSI, which will go to zero, and eventually they'll not be on SSI at all. They'll be, switched over. So the preferable program is SSDI and Medicare, and the counties can, through the states, an agreement with the states and the feds, buy into Medi-Cal. Some people don't want that premium taken out of their check. Yes.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is about expedited reinstatement. When
Yes.
the expedited reinstatement is improved, does that also mean the work incentive rules kind of start over?
Well, that's a good question. They start over, but not for 48 months or 2 years. Or 2 years. So there's that waiting period. So as soon as you're reinstated, and that process can take 6 months, so you get temporary payments for up to 6 months in theory. My client waited 11 months when that program first started, but the point is, before you start the new TWP, trial work period, and EPE, you wait 2 years before they start counting months to use against you to terminate your benefits.
Okay, so just to clarify, your expedited reinstatement is approved, so then 2 years thereafter, assuming there's no work involved over the $840 trigger amount, the trial work period does not start.
It does not start, those 9 months don't start for 2 years.
Okay. That is helpful. The second question I have is in regards to overpayments. So it is my understanding that after you have been suspended or cessated, whatever that word is, you are considered to be overpaid. So if you're going to appeal that overpayment, you're going to file a request for reconsideration. When would be the appropriate time to file for a waiver? Would it be after the...
I recommend people file them both at once. However, they're not going to do the waiver until after they do the request for reconsideration. It will be done in that order because once you've asked for a waiver, you have admitted the overpayment.
Okay, so this occurs even when you go to ODAR, Administrative Law Judge, and the Appeals Council?
I'm sorry? Just
So we're asking for the request for reconsideration
yeah.
and also the waiver, but say the request for reconsideration, the determination comes back unfavorable.
Well, then you go to the next level.
Which
You
is the
request an
administrative-
administrative law judge.
So then what happens to the waiver at that point?
Well, you can have both of them together when you get to the judge. Before him or her will be the appeal, the request, which is the request for hearing before an ALJ. It's the second appeal, and the waiver issue. I mean, if you accept the waiver, you're admitting the overpayment, and they decide to waive it, well, that may be a good thing to take. But to waive something, and I didn't go into that, and we are going to have to stop soon, so this is going to be the last answer. For an overpayment, there are 3 legal questions. Number 1, the fact of the overpayment. Was there an overpayment, and is the amount correct? Number 2 is, was the claimant with or without fault and causing the overpayment? And number 3 is, only if the claimant was found to be without fault in causing the overpayment, should it be waived? And to get it waived, there are only 2 grounds. One is hardship, where their expenses exceed their income, and the other one is general principles of equity and fairness. And all overpayments are handled that way, with those 3 questions.
I'm going to make a suggestion that for people who have questions that didn't get answered for the other speakers, that you submit them to the foundation, and we will try to get back to you. Or else you can contact the individual speakers through their contact information, which should be provided here, and we'll try to help you get answers to questions that were not addressed.
It's a very complicated process, but just remember that folks that are part of our agency and IOCO's agency, we do have benefit specialists on staff, and Department of Rehabilitation has excellent benefit specialists to talk about all this in plain English.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for coming to our seminar. As a reminder for those attorneys who wish to get continuing education credits, please turn in your evaluations and pick up your certificates at the end of the seminar. If you have any questions or comments on today's seminar, please contact People with Disabilities Foundation 415-931-3070 or info@pwdf.org. Thank you.